It's great to be with you tonight. James Morrow in for Paul Murray, who's suffering a bit of the lurgy that's been going around. You know, maybe the same one that's left my voice a bit creaky. You might have noticed that the past few weeks on Outsiders of the U.S. Report. But you know what? I'm sure you were too polite to notice. Anyway, get better soon, great man. I'm sure you'll be back in the chair tomorrow. But just because we don't have Paulie tonight does not mean we can't have a good time in his absence, does it? Or at least a better time than they're having over in the Liberal Party, where the big story is the ongoing drama over Northern Territory Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price and her comments last week about immigration. Comments that very much fell into the category of a gaffe. If you define a gaffe as when a politician accidentally tells the truth and the media and their opponents leap on them. Now, let's refresh everybody's memory here. The Northern Territory Senator, who a couple of months back decided to leave the Nationals Party room and sit with the Liberals, made waves after she gave an interview in which she singled out Indian migrants. Not in a hateful way, but simply making the point that this was an ethnic constituency that Labour has done a great job of courting and which the Albanese government is happy to see grow, even amidst a crisis of population and infrastructure and housing and, yes, dare I say it, even national identity. Now, you've probably seen it before, but just to set the scene and refresh everybody's memory, this is what she had to say on the ABC's afternoon briefing last week.
There is a concern with the Indian community, and only because there's been large numbers, and we can see that reflected in the way that the community votes for Labor at the same time. So if they're going to see a reflection that, okay, these individuals are going to vote for us more so than other parts of the community, well, then of course they're going to express a view that we'll get those sorts of individuals into our communities.
Cue the outrage. Day after day of headlines accusing Price of racism, singling out Indian Australians, and, of course, driving away a community that, according to Labour-aligned Redbridge pollster Kos Samaras, votes 85% of the time with Labour. Now, look, I'm on the record here as saying I think the senator made a big mistake by singling out one ethnic group in that interview, because it quite predictably opened the door to vexatious accusations of racism. But it was hardly, let's just put this out here, hardly a hanging offense. And what should have been a one-day story has now been going on for a good half a week. And you know who's driving it? Critics inside her own party, especially member for Mitchell and manager of opposition business in the House, as well as general factional numbers man Alex Hawke. He's the one leading the charge, having made an extraordinary phone call, not to Price, but to one of her staffers. Here was Senator Price having gone on Crediline just a few hours ago talking about this.
And I found it highly inappropriate to have that kind of conversation with another colleague's staffer, and also, you know, to suggest to bring another colleague's circumstances into that into the picture was certainly viewed as a threat, and that I wanted to call that out.
Yeah, and we need to talk about that other colleague in a moment. But here's what makes this really interesting. And we got to look at the sausage-making process today, is that it is not just Labour that I say is driving the story. Because as soon as her interview with the ABC dropped, I started getting texts from coalition operatives saying, well, gosh, Labour's going to have a lot of fun with this, aren't they? Okay, that's fair, but that's not where the real drama seems to be. Instead, again, with the Liberal Party in the state it is in, what's happening now, it reminds me of the old horror movie thing. You know, we've traced the calls, and they're coming from inside the House. My Sky News colleague Laura Jays interviewed Alex Hawke this morning. Here's a bit of that.
All I said to Jacinta was, would you consider apologising to the community for making a mistake about the remarks.
Did you say it in that way, or was it perhaps a bit more heated at the time?
No, pretty calm with her and I.
But what about the staff? Because that seemed to have been the issue, that you somehow berated her staff because you weren't able to contact her.
She did raise that with me, and she was upset that I hadn't called her direct, but I called her office and asked to speak to her, and I might have had a 1 to 2 minute conversation with her staff, and I advised her that if she was told that was angry, that wasn't correct, I was ringing to offer help.
So you spoke to this staff member?
About 1 to 2 minutes, yeah.
Right.
And Laura asked a very good question. On what authority did Hawke call Price's office?
So were you doing that just in what capacity? You know, did you discuss this with other Liberal Party colleagues and said, well, you know what, I'll call Jacinta and ask her to do that because this has done a lot of damage?
Look, that morning, you've got to remember this was just the morning after the comments. A lot of the metropolitan members with high Indian populations, my community's got them.
Right.
I've been a former multicultural affairs minister. I'd heard from interstate multicultural leaders. There was a lot of criticism building, and I knew on Thursday that the Labor Party would try and weaponise the comments that Jacinta had made the night before, and that was the point I made to her office. So, look, I explained that to her immediately, and I didn't berate anybody, and I have no, I rang somebody at random and said, can I speak to your boss?
There was also the question hanging over to this as to whether Hawke invoked Jane Hume. That's the colleague that Jacinta Price was speaking about before, and said, did he say that Price would wind up like Jane Hume over the remarks? See what you make of this response by Alex Hawke when Laura Jays put that to him.
So you didn't mention Jane at all by name or even infer to her?
Well, like I said, I'm not going to go into what I discussed back and forth.
Sounds like a yes, Alex.
Well, but I'm not going to say, because, she said a lot of things and I said a lot of things, and they're not for publication.
Among other things, I wonder why Hawke was ringing the front desk in Price's parliamentary office, when, of course, they would have each other's numbers on their phones and could ring one another directly. What was the point of that phone call? Now, everyone has their own version of this story, but I'm given to understand that, contrary to what Alex Hawke said, that call with the staffer was quite robust and that it may have lasted for as long as 5 minutes, and that it was indeed Hawke who brought up the spectre of Jane Hume, the Liberal senator who was, of course, sidelined in Susan Lay's cabinet reshuffle after she raised the spectre of Chinese spies allegedly infiltrating Chinese communities in the run-up to the last election. And I also think that it is an interesting story that Hawke, a factional power broker in the party's centre-right, has been leading the charge here against Price, who could fairly be called a conservative firebrand. Now, remember when Price came across the Liberals, it wasn't just destabilizing to the Nats, it also changed the equation of power within the coalition's major party, giving weight to more conservative voices who are out there gunning for Susan Lay's leadership. And it is also worth noting that at the last census, Alex Hawke, and he mentioned this himself, his own electorate of Mitchell boasted an Indian-born population of almost 10%, and that figure has almost certainly grown over the past 4 years since when that tally was taken. Now, at the last election, Hawke held on to the seat, but with a 6.7% swing against him, led by Labour candidate Devan Birjan, the daughter of Kurdish migrants. Hawke is also, of course, close to Leader of the Opposition Susan Ley, and the conservatives that Price aligns with, including Angus Taylor, well, not so much. Which may be why Hawke kept the matter going today with an interview with the ABC, demanding that Price apologize for her remarks, with a bit of a veiled hint that there'd be more trouble if she didn't.
Look, my view is there's just ongoing harm. I think it would be better to have an apology now because it would clear the matter up, and I think it just needs clearing up and moving on. And the quicker you do it, that's all I said to her on Thursday night, the quicker you do it, the better. And don't let Labor weaponise this.
It's all an indication of just how frayed things are within the Liberal Party at the moment, and indeed whether or what sort of future it has. I wrote on election night that the party was in an existential crisis after that result. Now, that it may, as I said at the time, not ultimately have a long-term road forward. And I'll tell you what, shenanigans like this are driving millions of mainstream conservative voters absolutely to the wall. And while I know that our electoral system here in Australia makes change hard, at the same time, if some reborn force either out of the National Party or coalescing like a uniting church of minor parties were to be born, the Libs could face an absolute wipeout in membership, just as the Tories have in the UK. It's not just over immigration either. Fractures are appearing all over the place on all sorts of issues. There was an interesting item my Daily Telegraph colleague Linda Silmalis had in her Sunday column in the Sunday Telegraph. In it, she wrote, tensions boiled over in Canberra this week, with two ex-Liberal ministers overheard in a tense verbal exchange. According to our mole, the senior Liberals were in an energy policy meeting when they emerged, with one allegedly telling the other, no one cares about farmers. Our operative claims the comment prompted a heated exchange, with the other senior Liberal heard firing back, that's BS. One MP was unable to be reached. The other, alleged to have made the farmer jibe, played it down, calling it a tongue-in-cheek chat. Well, I don't know who they were. I wonder who they were. But you know what? It's probably not too hard to do the math on this, given how few senior Liberal ex-ministers there are left. But I'll leave that to other people to speculate on. The point, though, is that the Liberals have a lot of work to do to work out who and what they stand for, and none of this is helping here, apology or not. Meanwhile, here's my biggest problem with this fight here. You know, immigration is a huge issue. I have said it before, and I'll say it again. It's kind of the everything issue that ties in housing and infrastructure and our underperforming GDP per capita. In other words, our declining living standards. We need to have a talk about it. We need to have an honest debate on this topic. And yet, the longer this goes on, the longer some people try and make a big deal about what Jacinta Price said, the longer Jacinta Price doesn't apologize and draw a line under this, the harder it will ever be to get this debate going. It was bad enough when those marches got hijacked by Nazis the other day, meaning that all sorts of people who had perfectly reasonable voices and opinions on this subject were tarred by association. Now we've got this, and that means the country is deprived of an adult conversation about migration, which it sorely needs. And on that, I'd say keep an eye out for the latest ABS arrival and departure stats this Thursday. You heard it here first. This is going to touch off the debate all over again. But my friend Nick Cater, you know him well from here, had a brilliant piece in the Australian today on all of this, which I wanted to bring to your attention. You should go and find the whole thing, read it. But he has written that what he calls the two-step migration process, whereby people come here on temporary visas only to become permanent residents, has hollowed out control, particularly when so many people come in to study various make-work degrees at tertiary institutions that are churning out diplomas and, by extension, visas. You know what I'm talking about. The control of our migration policy by university groups, he says, plus the politics of ethnic marginal seats, means that this is only going to get worse, Nick Cater says, before it gets better. And I would add that, again, the marches we saw last week will only be repeated as voters seek some assurance that politicians are in control of this situation, not that they're stopping immigration, just that they're in control and that they are using their control of the system for Australians' benefit, not their own.